Last episode, I was talking about doing some customization to a lightsaber hilt. If you haven't seen that video, it's episode 3, the Autowart Dueling Lightsaber Review. So I have the hilt in my hand. We're going to give it a custom paint job. We're going to add some leather and some weathering. We're going to take it from being plain to something looking really cool. Let's go. Hello to all my Jedi and Sith companions, or if you're here for the first time, welcome to my channel. Please make sure to like and subscribe and hit that bell button so you can be notified when I post new content. I am your host, the Frugal Jedi, and we're going to be doing this really cool customization to a lightsaber hilt. So let's point the camera down at the table and go through everything you'll need. Of course, you are going to need a lightsaber hilt. So I chose the Autowart model here. You're going to need the Allen key to remove the core, or you can use painter's tape. I find it a lot easier if you just remove all the electronics. It comes out easily, and we're going to do that. That way you don't have to worry about damaging anything. You're going to need sandpaper. This is ultra grit, very fine grit, 220. Some brushes, some sponges. You're going to need one of these Scotch-Brite pads, some spray paint, so I chose flat black. And after everything is done and we add details, we'll finish it with a clear matte, and this will protect the paint from scratching or from flaking away. And I'm also going to be putting a little bit of detailing in gold and copper, and these are just craft paints that you can pick up at a craft store. You're also going to need newspaper, of course, and you're going to want to be outside in a well-ventilated area when you're spray painting the hilt. And that about does it. Now, the other thing you can do, which is optional, is you can either paint and leave the hilt the way it is, or you can add a wrap to it. So we're going to add a wrap to it because I think it's going to look really cool. So what I have here is an old belt. And this is a bonded leather belt, and you can see that it's already starting to peel. So I'm going to peel off this bonded leather layer, and we're going to use that around the hilt. And I'm going to glue it in place, so I'm going to use E-Grip 6000, so it will never come off once that hilt has that wrap around it. Okay, so first thing we need to do is we need to remove the core from the hilt. So to remove the core from the hilt, there are 2 screws on the front, and I have 1 screw on the back. You can use the Allen key, but I'm going to use my own tool just because it's easier to hold. So I'm going to remove the screw on the back first. Now the screws in the front. Okay, so now I'm going to pull the core out. Sometimes you have to put a little bit of pressure with your finger on the button to make sure it's all the way down. Okay, so the electronics are out, and we're going to put the grip back on. We don't want to spray paint any of the threading because then it'll be really difficult to screw back in, so we're going to put the threading back in place like that. Okay, there it is. It's empty. It's ready to be painted. But before we paint it, we need to sand it. So let's do that now. So I've wet my sandpaper already. This is a wet ultrafine grit. And I'm just going to wrap it around the hilt. Okay, doesn't really look much different, but I'm hoping that little bit of sanding is going to help that black paint stick. So the next step is we're going to go outside, we're going to hang it up on something. I'll probably hang it by the pommel, and we'll give it a few coats of black paint and wait for it to dry. So I've taken the hilt and I'm using this old plastic tub, and I just have the hilt hanging with a string inside, and this will prevent the wind from taking the spray paint and putting it everywhere. I'm going to give this a real good shake, and we'll start giving it a few coats. Just light coats at first. Okay, we're ready for a second coat. Get a little bit in the pommel there. There we go. I'm not so concerned about getting it inside where the blade's going to go because I'm not going to see it. While we're waiting for the paint to dry, we're going to get the leather ready for the hilt. I just bought this belt from a thrift shop. I used it for a Halloween costume, and it did its purpose, and you can see it's coming apart. So we're going to reuse this. So I'm going to cut off the end. I'm going to peel that off. So I've let the hilt dry for around 4 hours. You just want to make sure that it's not sticky, obviously, and that you can pick it up and start touching it. Here I have my Scotch-Brite pad, and we're just going to start rubbing away at the hilt, and we're going to remove some of that black. And as I do that, you'll start to see that silver coming back through. Okay, so I mean, now you can see that weathering happening, which is cool because you get all the black inside the valleys and all that silver starts to pop out wherever it's raised. I mean, you could leave it like that. It does look pretty cool. You could do a little more. It's up to you, really. It's going to be a one of a kind. So you do it how you want to do it. I want to just try to rub a little bit off from inside the middle there. I think that's good enough for weathering right now. So yeah, we're just going to leave it like that. I'm going to wipe the hilt with a damp cloth. This is just to remove some of that dust from all the paint that we were scraping off with the Scotch-Brite pad. So I want to add a little bit of gold detailing inside these little crevices here. So I'm going to put a little bit of gold on the tip of the brush. And I want to dry brush it, so I don't want a whole lot of gold, so just enough so that just a little bit comes off the brush. And I'm just going to go inside here, and we're just going to lightly, and I'm going to use this larger brush, and I'm just going to go over it just to remove any excess. So I don't want it to be too obvious, just a little bit. Yeah, there it is. I think that's good. I'm going to take a little bit of this copper, and I mixed it with a little bit of brown. I'm just going to put it a little bit on a sponge. And I'm going to sponge some copper, and I think I'm going to put it up here where the emitter is, as if the heat from the blade has caused discoloration now. I'm also going to put a little bit of that copper around the buttons a little bit, like that. Oh, sure, around that little ring there too, why not? And down here a little bit. I'm not paying too much attention to the grip because we're going to be putting that leather on there. So while the paint is drying on the emitter and the button part and the pommel, I've started to take that old belt and I've wrapped it around the grip. And I've spaced it out the way I like. So now what I want to do is I'm going to mark it on the inside here because I want to cut off this excess. So to do that, I'm just going to use a toothpick and a little bit of white paint, and it's going to mark it on the inside. And I'm just kind of like, just roughly getting an idea of where I'm going to cut that off on the bottom. Okay, I don't know if you can see that, but a little white paint in there. Okay, so now I'm going to just unwrap it. And we're going to cut off this excess. I'm going to leave a lot of extra on there just because I don't know how much I'm going to need at the end here. Okay, so you can see that line that I'm going to cut right there. I'm going to take a little bit of E-Grip 6000 on the end of a toothpick, just like that. And I'm going to just apply it. Okay, just put a tiny bit. So now I'm going to lay down, I'll line up that leather. And I just want to make sure I'm not covering the threading. Make sure it's tight. All right. I'm also being mindful of the gap, or the, not the gap, the width between each one of these. I want to kind of keep them uniform. I want to stay down. So we have the leather wrap around the grip, and I think it looks really good. You can still remove it if you want to access the core. The pommel, you can still take that off. I'm happy. One last little touch I want to do is I want to give it a dry brush of brown. I'm going to use a raw umber. So I'm just going to dip my brush, or my sponge I should say, into that raw umber. And I want to wipe away all that excess paint. So I'm just lightly brushing. Just to kind of give that leather like a little bit of age to it. Don't want it to look so clean. Yeah, and it just highlights those ribs that are hidden under there. I think that looks really cool. Yeah, and you just want to make sure that you just use a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of paint on your sponge. Don't overdo it. It's better to just take longer and not have to go back and wipe it all off. Yeah, I like that. It just kind of gives it that aged look. Love it. Okay. Awesome. All right, I think we are done painting and modifying the saber. So the last step is to put the core back in, and then we'll do a comparison from old to new, and join me in final thoughts. So that brings us to the end. My final thoughts. I think it looks 100 times better than it did from the factory. I love how it turned out. I'm really happy with it. That leather grip feels great, and it just looks so much cooler having all these details and weathering effects to it. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell icon so you can be notified when I have new content available. Once again, I am the Frugal Jedi. Glad you watched. See you next week.